10 painful steps in the rain turned a helpless victim into a man preparing for war. A billionaire trapped in a wheelchair, a little black girl nobody took seriously, and a fiancée whose face turned white the moment she heard 6 simple words: "I can help you walk again." At first, everyone laughed. After all, what could a 9-year-old child from one of Chicago's poorest neighborhoods possibly know that doctors, specialists, and million-dollar treatments didn't? But what nobody realized was that the little girl had already uncovered a secret powerful enough to destroy a wedding, expose a devastating betrayal, and save a man's life. As a billionaire struggles to stand again, a child everyone overlooks becomes the only person brave enough to speak the truth. And before this story is over, one simple act of kindness will change both of their lives forever. The cold Chicago wind rolled across Jackson Park, carrying the smell of damp leaves, lake water, and distant traffic. It was the kind of afternoon that made most people pull their coats tighter and hurry home. But Ethan Whitmore stayed where he was. He sat alone in a sleek black wheelchair near a weathered wooden bench, staring across the jogging path. Runners passed him every few minutes, their shoes striking the pavement in steady rhythms. Some glanced at him. Most didn't. 6 months ago, he would have been one of them. 6 months ago, Ethan Whitmore had been the man whose face appeared on business magazines across America. The founder and CEO of Whitmore Medical Tech, a billionaire, a man who woke before sunrise to run 5 miles along the lakefront before heading to meetings worth millions of dollars. Now he sat in a wheelchair watching strangers do something he could no longer do. Run, walk, stand. Live without thinking about every movement. A gust of wind swept across the park. Ethan pulled his coat closer and looked down at his legs. They looked normal enough beneath the blanket covering them. That was the cruel part. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked wrong. Yet every day they seemed weaker. Every day standing became harder. Every day another piece of his independence slipped away. "You okay, sir?" The voice belonged to his driver, Robert, who stood nearby. Ethan forced a smile. As okay as a man can be after hearing his physical therapist tell him to lower his expectations. Robert shifted awkwardly. He had worked for Ethan for nearly 8 years, before the accident, before the hospital, before the wheelchair, back when Ethan had been the strongest person in every room. "I'm sorry, sir." Ethan nodded. "So am I." The silence stretched between them. Nearby, children laughed on a playground. A dog chased a tennis ball. A young couple walked hand in hand beneath trees painted gold by autumn. Life moved forward. It always did, even when yours felt stuck. Across the street stood St. Matthew's Church. Every Saturday afternoon, volunteers opened a community kitchen for families struggling to make ends meet. People came and went, carrying bags of bread and containers of soup. Ethan often watched them, not because he had to, because he liked seeing ordinary kindness. These days, kindness felt more valuable than money. His eyes drifted toward the church entrance. Several volunteers were loading empty trays into the building. Among them was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 9. She wore an oversized coat that looked a few winters too old. Her dark curls bounced as she carried a tray nearly half her size. She disappeared inside. A few minutes later, she came back out holding a paper bag. Then she stopped. Her eyes found Ethan. For a moment, she simply stared. Not rudely, not with pity, just curiosity. Then she started walking toward him. Robert noticed immediately. "Can I help you, sweetheart?" he asked. The girl smiled politely. "I'm not here for you." Robert blinked. Oh. She kept walking until she stood directly in front of Ethan. Up close, he noticed flour on her sleeves. A small smudge of it rested on her cheek. She looked like she'd spent the day helping bake bread. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan smiled. "Hello, hello. What is your name?" "Maya." "Nice to meet you, Maya." She nodded. Then she looked directly at his legs, not at the wheelchair. At his legs, like she was studying them. Ethan had become used to people avoiding that. Most people either stared too much or pretended not to notice. Maya did neither. She simply observed. Then she said something that made Robert laugh. Something that made Ethan blink. Something that would change everything. "I can help you walk again." Silence. Complete silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Robert chuckled awkwardly. "That's very sweet, honey." Maya didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Ethan. "I can." Ethan stared at her. For a moment, he wasn't sure whether to laugh or thank her. Instead, he asked gently, "You can?" She nodded. "Yes." Robert rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, that's certainly ambitious." A nearby jogger overheard and smiled. An elderly woman sitting on the next bench shook her head fondly. Children said strange things. That was normal. Ethan forced a smile. "I appreciate that, Maya." She frowned slightly. Not angry. More like someone frustrated that nobody was taking her seriously. "You don't believe me." The directness caught him off guard. Most adults spent their lives avoiding honesty. Children didn't. "I think a lot of doctors have tried," Ethan said carefully. "And none of them helped. Maybe they're trying the wrong thing." Robert laughed again. Maya finally turned toward him. "I wasn't talking to you." The old woman nearby burst into laughter. Even Ethan smiled. For the first time that day. Maya folded her arms. "I know people think I'm just a kid." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And are they wrong?" "Usually." That earned another laugh. But before Ethan could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. "Ethan." The warmth disappeared from his smile instantly. "Claire." She approached from the path wearing an elegant cream-colored coat. Her blonde hair moved gently in the wind. To anyone watching, she looked perfect, beautiful, graceful, devoted. The woman who had stayed by her fiancé's side through tragedy. The woman newspapers called inspiring. The woman everyone admired. Claire stopped beside the wheelchair. "Who's this, Maya?" Ethan said. "We were talking." Claire smiled politely. "Well, hello, Maya." Maya looked up at her. The smile vanished from the little girl's face. Not fear, not dislike. Something else. Recognition. A strange tension settled over her features. Claire noticed it too. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Then Ethan said it. "Maya says she can help me walk again." The reaction lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. Ethan almost did. Almost. Claire's smile froze. Her eyes widened. Her face lost color. Only for a heartbeat. Then the expression vanished. The perfect smile returned. But Ethan had seen it. And so had Maya. The little girl didn't take her eyes off Claire. Neither of them spoke. The air suddenly felt colder. "That's," Claire said carefully. "That's a very imaginative thing to say." Maya remained silent. Claire looked down at her. Maya looked right back. For reasons Ethan couldn't explain, the moment felt wrong. Strange. Charged. As if two people were having a conversation without words. Finally, Claire laughed softly. "Come on, Ethan. We should get going." Ethan continued studying her. The reaction had been tiny. Maybe nothing. Maybe he imagined it. Still, why had she looked frightened? Robert moved behind the wheelchair. Claire stepped closer. Maya suddenly spoke again. Not loudly, just enough for Ethan to hear. Be careful. Claire turned immediately. What did you say? Maya didn't answer. The little girl simply stepped backward. The wind lifted a few loose curls around her face. Then she looked at Ethan one last time. I'll see you tomorrow. And before anyone could stop her, she turned and ran toward the church. Ethan watched her disappear through the doors. The paper bag bounced against her side as she ran. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. You shouldn't listen to children. Ethan looked at her. The words sounded harmless, normal, yet something about them felt different, cold, calculated. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because of the way Maya had looked at her. Maybe it was because of that brief flash of fear. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in months, someone had spoken to him like recovery was possible. Not probable. Not realistic. Possible. As Robert pushed the wheelchair toward the waiting car, Ethan glanced back at the church. The little girl was gone. Only the fading glow of sunset remained. But her words echoed inside his mind. I can help you walk again. And for reasons he didn't understand yet. Claire seemed terrified that she might be right. The ride back to Ethan's estate was unusually quiet. The black SUV moved through downtown Chicago, while evening lights flickered to life beyond the windows. Glass towers reflected streaks of orange sunset. Traffic crawled along wet streets. People hurried home carrying groceries, coffee cups, and backpacks. Normal lives. Normal problems. Things Ethan found himself envying more often these days. Claire sat beside him in the back seat. Her hand rested gently on his arm. Anyone watching would have seen a devoted fiancée caring for the man she loved. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the expression he'd seen in the park. That brief flash of fear. It had lasted less than a second. Still, it lingered in his mind. You're quiet, Claire said softly. Ethan forced a smile. Just tired. She squeezed his hand. You pushed yourself today. I sat in a wheelchair and watched people jog. Claire laughed lightly. You know what I mean. He nodded. Outside, neon signs reflected across the glass. A family walked into a pizza shop. A group of teenagers crossed the street carrying basketballs. Life seemed to move faster than ever whenever you couldn't keep up with it. Claire leaned closer. You shouldn't let that little girl get your hopes up. The words sounded casual, but Ethan noticed she had brought Maya up again. He hadn't mentioned her once since leaving the park. She was just being kind, Ethan replied. Claire looked out the window. Children don't understand reality. Something about the sentence bothered him. Not enough to argue. Not enough to question. Just enough to remember. The rest of the drive passed in silence. By the time they reached the estate along Lake Michigan, darkness had settled over the city. The mansion stood illuminated against the night sky. Tall windows glowed with warm golden light. Perfect landscaping. Perfect architecture. Perfect appearances. Just like Claire. Robert helped Ethan out of the SUV and into the house. Claire kissed his forehead. I'll bring your medication in an hour. Medication. The word suddenly sounded heavier than it should have. Ethan pushed the thought away. He was being ridiculous. A child made a strange comment. That was all. Yet long after Claire left the room, Maya's face stayed in his mind, especially the way she had looked at Claire, as if she knew something, as if she'd seen something, as if adults were the only people who didn't understand what was happening. Across the city, Maya Carter was washing soup bowls in the basement kitchen of St. Matthew's Church. The room smelled like bread, onions, and dish soap. Metal trays clattered. Volunteers laughed while stacking chairs. The Saturday meal service had finally ended. Most children Maya's age would have been home watching cartoons. But Maya wasn't most children. She dried another bowl and placed it on a shelf. "You're still working?" Her mother smiled from across the room. Denise Carter looked exhausted. She always looked exhausted. Working 2 jobs had a way of doing that. Yet she still smiled more than most people Maya knew. "Almost done," Maya said. Denise walked over and brushed a loose curl away from her daughter's face. "You helped enough today." "I know, and then why are you still here?" Maya glanced toward the church windows, thinking. Denise recognized that look immediately. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Maya." The little girl sighed. "There was a man in the park." Denise smiled. "That's usually where people are. The man in the wheelchair." "Oh." Now she remembered. Several volunteers had mentioned seeing a wealthy businessman nearby. He seemed sad. Denise nodded. "People can be sad. I told him I could help him walk again." Her mother froze, for exactly 1 second. Then she laughed. "Oh, honey, I can." "Maya!" The girl set down the towel. "You always tell me helping people matters." "It does." "Then why is everyone laughing?" Denise crouched beside her, because she knew this conversation. Maya had been having versions of it her entire life. People underestimated her, ignored her, doubted her. Not because she wasn't smart, because she was young. "People aren't laughing because you're bad," Denise said gently. "They're laughing because you're 9. Maya frowned. "That's not fair." "No." "It doesn't make sense." "No." "Then why do adults keep doing it?" Denise smiled sadly. "Because adults forget what it feels like to be ignored." Maya looked down at the floor. The old linoleum tiles had cracks running through them. Just like the apartment. Just like the stairwell. Just like most things in their neighborhood. Her mother stood and returned to cleaning. But Maya couldn't stop thinking about the man in the wheelchair, or the woman beside him, especially the woman. A few minutes later, church volunteer Harold Jenkins entered carrying a box of canned goods. Harold was 72, retired, widowed, and one of Maya's favorite people in the world. He treated children like actual human beings, which automatically made him different from most adults. "Evening, ladies." "Evening, Harold." Maya smiled. Harold immediately noticed something. "What's got you thinking so hard?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "A man in the park." Harold grinned. "That's how every interesting story starts." Maya didn't smile back. That caught his attention. "What happened?" She explained everything. The wheelchair, the conversation, Claire's reaction, the strange feeling she'd gotten. Harold listened carefully. When she finished, he rubbed his chin. "You think something is wrong?" Maya nodded. "I know something is wrong." Harold studied her face. Many people dismissed Maya because she was young. Harold wasn't one of them. Over the years, he'd learned something. The child noticed things adults missed. Small details, expressions, conversations, patterns, things most people ignored. "What makes you think that?" Maya looked toward the window. The night outside had turned dark. Streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot. The woman was scared. "Maybe." "No." Harold waited. She wasn't scared of me. Then what was she scared of? Maya swallowed. The truth. The old man remained silent. Not because he agreed. Not because he disagreed. Because he wasn't sure. And that bothered him. Meanwhile, several miles away, Maya's neighborhood prepared for another difficult night. Southside Chicago looked different after dark. The glow of liquor stores mixed with neon on signs. Train tracks rattled overhead. Sirens echoed in the distance. Wind pushed old newspapers across cracked sidewalks. Maya and her mother walked home carrying leftover bread from the church. They lived in a narrow apartment building squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The hallway smelled like old paint and heating pipes. Their apartment sat on the third floor. Small, crowded, aging, but home, at least for now. Inside, Denise immediately began sorting bills on the kitchen table. Electric bill, water bill, rent notice, past due notice, another past due notice. Maya pretended not to notice. She always noticed. Children in poor families learned to read adult faces before they learned to read books. And lately, her mother's face looked worried, very worried. Denise quickly covered the papers when she saw Maya watching. Homework first. Maya nodded. But neither of them mentioned the envelope marked final notice. Neither of them mentioned the landlord. Neither of them mentioned the possibility that home might not remain home much longer. Later that night, while rain tapped softly against the window, Maya sat on her bed thinking. Most children dreamed about toys, or birthdays, or school. Maya thought about the man in the wheelchair, his eyes, his sadness, his loneliness, the way he'd looked at runners, like someone staring through a window at a life he used to have. She also thought about Claire, the fear, the tension, the expression. Something wasn't right, and she couldn't shake the feeling. Across the city, Ethan lay awake in his enormous bedroom. The mansion was silent. Luxury surrounded him. Expensive furniture, rare artwork, custom lighting. Everything money could buy. Everything except peace. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya standing in front of him. I can help you walk again. A ridiculous statement. An impossible statement. A child's statement. Yet somehow it carried more hope than every medical report he'd received in 6 months. Eventually he turned toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass. Chicago glittered beyond the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, he found himself wondering not whether Maya was wrong, but whether she knew something he didn't. Because somewhere across the city, in a tiny apartment near the train tracks, a little girl everyone ignored was lying awake with the exact same question. And neither of them knew that the answer would change both of their lives forever. The next morning arrived beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Chicago looked cold from Ethan Whitmore's bedroom window. Lake Michigan stretched across the horizon like a sheet of steel. The water reflected the color of the sky. Wind bent the tops of distant trees along the shoreline. Ethan sat awake long before sunrise. Sleep had come in fragments. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya standing in front of him. I can help you walk again. The words made no sense. Yet somehow they refused to leave him alone. A soft knock sounded on the door. Before he answered, Claire entered carrying a silver tray. Coffee, water, medication. Every morning looked exactly the same. Good morning, she said warmly. Ethan forced a smile. Morning. Claire crossed the room and set the tray beside him. You slept? A little. She sat beside him on the edge of the bed. Concern immediately filled her face. The expression was so practiced it almost looked natural. I worry about you. Ethan nodded. I know. Claire handed him 2 white pills. The doctor said consistency matters. The doctor said. Those words had become part of his daily routine. The doctor said. The therapist said. The specialist said. The experts said. For 6 months, everyone had been telling him what his body could no longer do. Walk, run, climb stairs, lead his company, control his life. Slowly, piece by piece, independence had been replaced by instructions. Ethan took the pills, swallowed them with water. Claire watched carefully, just like she always did. Then she smiled. Good. The moment passed. Normal, routine, completely ordinary. Yet for the first time, Ethan found himself looking at the pills differently. Not because he suspected anything. Not yet. Because Maya's words had planted something dangerous. A question. Questions were powerful things, especially when they refused to die. An hour later, Robert wheeled Ethan through the enormous halls of the Whitmore estate. The mansion overlooked Lake Michigan from nearly every room. Glass walls, imported stone, custom artwork. Everything expensive. Everything impressive. Everything that once mattered. Now Ethan barely noticed it. The wheelchair rolled across polished floors. The sound echoed through the empty house. He hated that sound. 6 months ago, he had climbed mountains. Now people pushed him from room to room. The humiliation never disappeared, no matter how much he pretended otherwise. Your board meeting starts in 30 minutes, Robert said. Ethan sighed. Wonderful. The board meeting happened in a private conference room inside the estate. It had become easier than traveling downtown. At least that was what everyone kept telling him. Easier. That word again. Everything had become easier. Easier for others. Not for him. When Ethan entered the room, 6 board members stood to greet him. They smiled politely. They asked about his recovery. They told him not to overwork himself. They told him to focus on healing. Every conversation felt identical, and every conversation carried the same hidden message. You're not the man you used to be. The meeting began. Financial reports, shareholder updates, new acquisitions, company strategy. Topics Ethan once controlled effortlessly. Today, he spent half the meeting fighting exhaustion. His legs felt unusually heavy. His concentration drifted. By noon, a headache throbbed behind his eyes. One board member leaned forward. Maybe Claire should handle more of this temporarily. The room grew quiet. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. The suggestion lingered in the air. Temporary. Everything was temporary lately. Temporary authority, temporary assistance, temporary accommodations, temporary dependence. Yet every temporary thing seemed to last longer than expected. Ethan forced a smile. I'm still CEO. Of course. The board member immediately backed down. But the damage was done. The thought remained. Claire was already becoming part of conversations she never used to be part of. After the meeting ended, Ethan sat alone in his study. Rain tapped against the windows. The room smelled faintly of leather and old books. A photograph stood on his desk. 6 years old, taken after the Chicago Marathon. The younger Ethan stood with a medal around his neck, sweat-soaked, exhausted, grinning, alive. He picked up the frame, studied it. That man felt like a stranger now. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Claire entered. You missed lunch. I wasn't hungry. She walked behind him and rested her hands on his shoulders. To anyone watching, it would have looked loving, supportive, perfect. You need to take care of yourself. Ethan stared at the marathon photo. I used to run 26 miles. Claire's smile faded slightly. Ethan, I remember finishing that race. His voice softened. I thought that version of me would always exist. Claire squeezed his shoulder. Life changes. The words sounded harmless, but something about them unsettled him. Life changes. Maybe. Or maybe someone changes it. The thought appeared suddenly, unexpectedly, then vanished. Yet it left a mark. Across the city, Maya Carter was having a very different day. The old school building sat beneath elevated train tracks. Every few minutes, the entire structure vibrated. Desks rattled, windows trembled. Students barely noticed anymore. They had grown up with the noise. Maya sat near the back of her classroom. Her notebook was filled with sketches. Not cartoons. People. Faces. Observations. She liked studying people. Sometimes they revealed things before they spoke. The boy beside her leaned over. You talking to another billionaire today? A few kids laughed. Maya ignored them. The teasing wasn't new. Nothing about being poor was new. Nothing about being different was new. At recess, two girls whispered as Maya walked by. One pointed at her shoes. Another laughed. Maya kept walking. She had learned something a long time ago. People who needed to make others feel small usually felt small themselves. The lesson didn't stop the hurt, but it helped. Later that afternoon, she left school and headed directly to St. Matthew's Church. The smell of fresh bread greeted her before she reached the door. Inside, volunteers prepared meals for the evening service. Denise was already working. Harold sat near the kitchen window drinking coffee. When he saw Maya, he smiled. There's my favorite detective. Maya laughed. Detective? You spend all day observing people. He pointed toward a chair. Come sit. She did. Harold studied her face. Still thinking about the man in the wheelchair? Maya nodded. I think about him a lot. Why? She looked out the window. The answer came easily. Because he's lonely. Harold's expression softened. Lonely? Everybody talks to him like he's broken. The old man remained silent. Maya continued. They talk around him, not to him. Harold slowly nodded. There was wisdom in that observation, more wisdom than most adults possessed. Maybe. Maya folded her hands. The woman talks for him. Claire? Yes. Harold watched her carefully. And that bothers you? Maya thought for a moment, then nodded. She acts like he belongs to her. The old man stared into his coffee. Something about that sentence unsettled him. Not because Maya sounded dramatic, because she sounded certain. And certainty coming from a child usually meant she had noticed something others missed. That evening, after helping distribute meals, Maya walked home with her mother. The wind had grown stronger. Streetlights flickered overhead. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed through the darkness. Their apartment building appeared exactly as it always did. Old, tired, overlooked, much like the people living inside it. As they climbed the stairs, Maya noticed an envelope stuck beneath their apartment door. Denise saw it too. Her smile disappeared immediately. Maya pretended not to notice, but she noticed everything. Her mother opened the letter, read it, then quietly folded it. The movement lasted only seconds, yet Maya saw the tears forming, just for a moment. Then they vanished, like Claire's fear in the park. Adults thought children missed these things. Adults were wrong. That night, after dinner, Maya sat by the window watching trains pass. Each one shook the building. Each one carried strangers somewhere else. Somewhere better, maybe. Across the city, Ethan sat in his study staring at the same rain-dark sky. Two completely different lives, two completely different worlds. Yet both of them felt trapped. One by poverty, one by a wheelchair, one by circumstances, one by something he couldn't yet understand. And neither of them knew that tomorrow would bring them together again. Because Maya Carter had decided she wasn't finished helping the man in the wheelchair. And Ethan Whitmore was beginning to realize that the little girl everyone ignored might be the only person asking the questions nobody else dared to ask. Rain fell across Chicago the following afternoon. Not a storm, just a steady gray drizzle that painted the city in muted colors. Water collected along curbs. Bus tires hissed across wet pavement. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Most stayed indoors. But Ethan found himself asking Robert to take him back to the park. Again? Robert asked. Ethan nodded. I need some air. That wasn't entirely true. He needed answers. The SUV pulled beside Jackson Park just after 3 o'clock. The rain had emptied most of the walking paths. Only a few determined joggers remained. The church across the street was busier than usual. Volunteers moved boxes of donated food through the side entrance while families waited beneath awnings. Robert rolled Ethan beneath a covered pavilion overlooking the lake. Gray waves rolled against the shore. Cold wind carried the smell of rain and wet earth. For nearly 20 minutes, nobody came. Ethan began wondering if Maya would show up at all. Then he saw her. The little girl emerged from the church carrying 2 bags of bread nearly as large as she was. Her oversized coat looked even bigger in the rain. Water dripped from her curls. She spotted him immediately. A smile crossed her face. Not excitement, not surprise. More like recognition, as if she'd expected him to come back. She handed the bread to an elderly woman waiting nearby, then hurried across the street. When she reached the pavilion, she stopped in front of Ethan. I knew you'd come. Ethan laughed softly. You did? She nodded. You looked like somebody thinking about something. Is that unusual? For grown-ups? She shrugged. Sometimes. The answer made Robert chuckle. Maya turned toward Ethan. Did you practice standing? Ethan blinked. Practice standing? Yesterday. I was busy. She looked disappointed. You should practice. I can barely stand. That's why you practice. The certainty in her voice was almost funny. Almost. But Ethan noticed something. Maya never spoke to him like a patient. She spoke to him like a person. That felt surprisingly rare. The rain continued falling. For a few moments they watched the lake in silence. Then Ethan asked the question that had followed him for 2 days. Why did you tell me to be careful? Maya's expression changed immediately. The playful confidence vanished. Now she looked serious. Older somehow. She glanced toward the church, then back toward Ethan. Finally, she lowered her voice. Because of her, Claire. The name didn't need to be spoken. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. What about her? Maya hesitated. For the first time since meeting her, she seemed uncertain. Not scared, just careful. Like someone deciding how much truth another person was ready to hear. Before she could answer, thunder rumbled somewhere over the lake. The sound echoed across the water. Maya looked down at her shoes, then spoke quietly. A few weeks ago, I saw her. Ethan remained silent. Outside church. Doing what? The little girl reached into her coat pocket. Slowly, carefully. When her hand emerged, she was holding a tiny plastic bag. Inside sat a single white pill. Ethan stared at it. The world seemed to narrow. The rain, the traffic, the lake. Everything faded. Only the pill remained. I found this. His voice sounded distant. Where? Near the church parking lot. Maya swallowed. She dropped it. Robert looked confused. What does that prove? Maya ignored him. Her eyes remained on Ethan. She didn't know I saw. Ethan couldn't stop staring at the pill. It looked ordinary, harmless, exactly like the pills Claire gave him every morning. His heartbeat quickened. A coincidence. It had to be. Millions of people took white pills. Millions. Still, his chest felt strangely tight. What did you do with it? Maya brightened slightly. The answer seemed important to her. I showed Mr. Harold. The man from the church? She nodded. He used to be a pharmacist. Ethan sat up straighter. What did he say? The rain suddenly seemed louder. Maya glanced around again, then stepped closer. He said it didn't look right. Something cold moved through Ethan's stomach. What does that mean? He said it wasn't medicine he recognized for helping legs get stronger. Robert crossed his arms. That's not exactly scientific. I know. Maya nodded. But that's not all. The little girl looked down at the plastic bag. I asked him why someone would take medicine like that. Ethan's pulse quickened. And? He said some medicines can make muscles weaker if people take them for a long time. Silence. Nobody spoke. Rain tapped against the pavilion roof. Cars moved through puddles. A train horn echoed somewhere in the distance. The city continued normally. Yet Ethan felt like something inside him had shifted. Not certainty, not proof, just possibility. A terrible possibility. No. The word left his mouth before he realized he'd spoken. Maya watched him carefully. Ethan shook his head. No. Claire wouldn't do that. She couldn't. She had sat beside his hospital bed, held his hand, cried when doctors delivered bad news, canceled vacations, postponed her life, supported him, loved him. Didn't she? The questions came faster now. Too fast. His head hurt. Maya's voice softened. I didn't want to upset you. Ethan looked away toward the lake. Dark water rolled beneath dark clouds. He remembered every morning pill, every evening pill, every doctor appointment, every explanation, every setback, every promise that recovery simply took time. Maybe it was all true. Maybe. Then why did Claire look terrified? The question returned. Again, and again, and again. Ethan? Maya's voice sounded small now, concerned. He looked back at her. The little girl suddenly seemed frightened she had hurt him. Not physically, emotionally, like she regretted speaking. And that realization struck him harder than anything else. Maya wasn't trying to gain something. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for favors. She wasn't asking for attention. She was trying to help. That's all. Purely. Honestly. Help. The kind of help that expected nothing in return. The kind of help most adults forgot existed. Ethan slowly reached toward the plastic bag. Maya handed it to him. He studied the pill. A simple white tablet. Nothing remarkable. Yet it felt heavier than stone. What if you're wrong? He asked quietly. The question surprised her. Not because of the words, because of the sadness behind them. Maya thought carefully, then answered. Then you lose one day worrying. She pointed gently toward his legs. But what if I'm right? The question landed like a hammer. What if I'm right? For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind pushed rain sideways beneath the pavilion. Robert looked uncomfortable. Ethan looked frozen, and Maya simply waited. Finally, Ethan slipped the plastic bag into his coat pocket. "Thank you." The little girl smiled. Not proudly, not triumphantly, just relieved, as if she had finally delivered something she'd been carrying too long. Across the street, church bells began ringing. Volunteers started gathering for evening service. Maya glanced toward the building. "I have to go." Ethan nodded. She turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing." She looked back at him. "If you want to know for sure." Ethan waited. "You should ask somebody who isn't already telling you the answer." The statement sounded impossibly wise coming from a 9-year-old. Then she ran back toward the church, her coat flapping in the rain, her small figure disappearing through the doors. Ethan watched until she vanished. Only then did he reach into his pocket and touch the plastic bag again. Robert finally broke the silence. "Do you believe her?" Ethan stared at the church entrance. "No." But the answer didn't sound convincing, not even to him. Because for the first time since his accident, a possibility existed that terrified him more than losing the use of his legs. The possibility that his condition wasn't getting worse on its own. The possibility that someone wanted it to. And somewhere deep inside, a question was beginning to grow. A question he could no longer ignore. If Claire wasn't the person saving him, then who exactly had he been trusting all this time? The question followed Ethan Whitmore home like a shadow. It sat beside him during dinner. It lingered in the hallways of the mansion. It waited outside his bedroom door. And when he finally lay down that night, staring at the ceiling above his bed, the question remained. Who? The rain continued long after midnight. Water streaked down the enormous windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The world outside looked blurred, uncertain. Much like Ethan's thoughts, for 6 months he had trusted doctors, therapists, reports, specialists, and Claire. Especially Claire, the woman who had never left his side, the woman everyone admired, the woman who cried when he suffered, the woman who reminded him to take every pill, the woman Maya seemed afraid of. The contradiction made his head ache. Around 2 a.m, Ethan finally fell asleep. His dreams were strange. He dreamed he was running, not fast, not far, just running. His feet hit pavement, his lungs burned, his body moved effortlessly, the way it used to, the way it was supposed to. Then suddenly he looked down. The pavement vanished. His legs vanished, and a wheelchair appeared beneath him. He woke with a gasp. Sweat covered his forehead. His heart hammered inside his chest. For several seconds he simply sat there breathing. Then he looked toward his legs. Still there. Still weak. Still his. At least for now. The next morning arrived clear and cold. The storm had passed. Chicago glittered beneath pale sunlight. Claire entered with breakfast and medication exactly as she always did. Nothing about her behavior seemed different. Nothing seemed suspicious. That almost made things worse. Ethan accepted the pills, swallowed them, watched her smile. And for the first time since meeting Maya, he found himself wondering what would happen if he stopped. The thought startled him. Immediately he pushed it away. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. But the question remained. Later that afternoon, Ethan asked Robert to take him back to St. Matthew's Church. Not the park. The church. Robert looked surprised. You want to volunteer? Ethan laughed. I think they'd fire me after 5 minutes. Robert smiled. Fair point. When they arrived, the church parking lot buzzed with activity. Families lined up near the community kitchen. Volunteers carried food trays. Children ran through puddles left behind by yesterday's rain. The entire place felt alive, messy, real, very different from Ethan's carefully controlled world. Robert pushed the wheelchair toward the rear of the building. The smell hit Ethan first. Fresh bread, soup, coffee, something warm, something comforting. For a moment, he simply watched. People helping people. No contracts, no stock prices, no board meetings, just kindness. Then he spotted Maya. She stood near a folding table organizing canned food. Her oversized coat hung from her shoulders. Her sleeves were rolled up. She looked completely focused. Until she saw him. Then her entire face brightened. "You came back." Ethan smiled. "I did." Maya nodded as if she had expected that outcome. "Good." The confidence amused him. "Good?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because we have work to do." Ethan laughed. "We do?" Maya pointed toward a quiet area behind the church. Near a brick wall sat an old wooden bench. The area was mostly hidden from the parking lot. "What kind of work?" She looked at him like the answer was obvious. "Standing." Ethan stared, then laughed again, this time longer. Maya didn't laugh. She was completely serious. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Maya, you said the doctors aren't helping." He opened his mouth, then stopped. Technically, he had said that. So we try. The simplicity of her logic was almost impossible to argue with. Ethan shook his head. "I can't." "You don't know that." "I do." "You haven't tried." "I try every day." "No." Maya folded her arms. "You sit every day." The words hit harder than she intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. Ethan looked away, toward the parking lot, toward the people, anywhere but at the little girl. Because deep down, he knew she was right. Not entirely, but enough. After months of disappointment, he had stopped fighting, stopped hoping, stopped believing improvement was possible. The realization hurt. Maya's voice softened. "I'm not trying to be mean." "I know. You just look like someone who gave up." That hurt even more. Because it was true. For several moments, neither of them spoke. A church bell rang somewhere inside the building. The wind moved through nearby trees. Leaves skittered across the pavement. Finally, Ethan sighed. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Maya pointed toward the bench. "Go there." Robert looked uncertain. "Sir?" Ethan held up a hand. "It's okay." The driver stepped back. Maya rolled the wheelchair closer to the bench. Then she stood directly in front of Ethan. "Put your hands here." She tapped the wooden seat. Ethan looked at her, then at the bench, then at his legs. A strange nervousness settled inside him. Standing shouldn't be scary. Yet somehow it was. Because failure had become familiar, and familiar things were strangely comfortable. Hope was much more dangerous. Hope could hurt you. "What if I fall?" Maya shrugged. "Then you fall." That wasn't the answer he wanted. "What if I can't do it?" She shrugged again. "Then we know." Ethan stared at her. Children weren't supposed to be this stubborn. Then again, neither was he. Slowly he leaned forward, placed both hands on the bench. The wood felt cold beneath his palms. His heart began beating faster. He could feel Robert watching, could feel volunteers glancing over, could feel embarrassment waiting nearby. Ready. Patient. Ethan pushed downward. Nothing happened. His arms trembled. His shoulders strained. But his body remained seated. The effort exhausted him immediately. He slumped backward. There. He forced a smile. We tried. Maya didn't move. Again. Ethan blinked. What? Again. The certainty in her voice left no room for negotiation. He sighed heavily, then leaned forward once more. Hands on the bench. Breath held. Push. This time his body lifted slightly. Only an inch. Maybe 2. His legs shook violently. His arms burned. Then he dropped back into the wheelchair, breathing hard. The effort felt ridiculous, humiliating, pointless. I'm done. Maya shook her head. No. Ethan laughed in disbelief. No. No. The little girl stepped closer. Then she said something very quietly, something nobody else heard. Not Robert. Not the volunteers. Only Ethan. If you quit now, Claire was right. The words landed like lightning. His head snapped upward. What? Maya hesitated, realizing she'd said too much. But it was already done. Ethan stared at her. His pulse quickened. The little girl looked toward the ground, then back at him. She acts like you can't. The sentence hung in the air. Simple, innocent, yet devastating. Because Ethan suddenly realized something. Claire never encouraged him to try harder. Never. She encouraged him to rest, to be careful, to accept limitations, to avoid disappointment. At the time it sounded loving. Now, he wasn't so sure. Maya pointed toward the bench again. One more, silence. Then Ethan slowly leaned forward. His hands found the wood. His shoulders tightened. His muscles strained. Push. The world narrowed. Push. Pain shot through his arms. Push. His legs trembled violently. Push. And suddenly, he wasn't sitting anymore. For a brief moment. Just a brief moment. Ethan Whitmore was standing. Not fully upright. Not balanced. Not strong. But standing. His eyes widened. Robert gasped. Several volunteers turned. Nobody spoke. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Then Ethan collapsed back into the wheelchair, breathing hard, heart racing, completely stunned. The silence felt enormous. Finally, he looked at Maya. The little girl was smiling. Not surprised, not shocked, just happy, like she'd known all along. You did it. Ethan stared at her. His throat tightened unexpectedly. For the first time in 6 months. For the first time since the accident. For the first time since doctors began lowering expectations and discussing permanent limitations, he had stood. Only a few seconds. But it had happened. Tears burned unexpectedly behind his eyes. He quickly looked away, embarrassed. Yet Maya pretended not to notice. The greatest kindness sometimes came from knowing when not to look. After a long moment, Ethan whispered, I stood. The words sounded unreal. Maya nodded. Yes. A smile slowly spread across Ethan's face. Small. Fragile. But real. The first genuine smile he'd felt in months. And neither of them noticed the woman standing across the parking lot, watching from a distance. Claire had arrived 10 minutes earlier. just in time to see everything, including the moment Ethan stood. Her face slowly lost its color, because for the first time since the accident, something had gone terribly wrong with her plan, and she knew it. Claire remained hidden beside the parking lot for several seconds after Ethan stood. The wind tugged at her coat. The church bell echoed in the distance. Yet she barely noticed either. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan, on his legs, on the impossible sight she had just witnessed. He wasn't supposed to stand. Not yet. Not at all. Certainly not after everything that had happened during the past 6 months. A volunteer crossed between them, breaking her line of sight. When she looked again, Maya was smiling at Ethan. The little girl, again. Claire felt something cold settle inside her chest. Then she quickly composed herself. By the time Ethan noticed her approaching, her expression looked perfectly normal. Warm, supportive, loving. The same expression she showed everyone. Ethan. He turned. A strange mixture of emotions crossed his face. Excitement. Confusion. Hope. Real hope. Claire hated how dangerous hope could be. "You came," Ethan said. "I thought I'd surprise you." Her gaze shifted briefly toward Maya. The girl met her eyes without flinching. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Claire smiled. "Hello again, Maya." "Hello." The response was polite. Nothing more. Nothing less. Claire turned back toward Ethan. "You look tired." Ethan laughed softly. "I just stood up. I heard." Something flickered in her eyes. Gone before anyone else could notice. But Maya noticed. She always noticed. "That's wonderful," Claire continued. "Maybe your therapy is finally working." The words sounded supportive, yet something about them felt rehearsed. Even Ethan noticed. Not enough to accuse her. Not enough to challenge her. Just enough to make him wonder. Again, and again, and again. That evening, the mansion felt different. Not physically. Emotionally. The walls were the same. The furniture was the same. The view of Lake Michigan was the same. But Ethan wasn't. For the first time in months, something had changed. He had stood. Only a few seconds. Yet the memory replayed endlessly inside his mind. The pressure beneath his feet. The trembling in his legs. The shock of being upright. The realization that maybe, just maybe, his situation wasn't as hopeless as everyone claimed. Dinner sat untouched in front of him. Across the table, Claire discussed wedding details, flowers, guests, music, seating arrangements. The wedding was only a few weeks away. Normally, Ethan would have listened. Tonight, he barely heard a word. His thoughts remained somewhere behind St. Matthew's Church, near the old wooden bench, near a little girl who refused to accept limits. "Ethan?" He blinked. "What?" Claire smiled. "I asked if you liked the ivory roses." "Sure." "You didn't hear me." He looked down. "No." The smile on Claire's face tightened slightly. Only slightly. "What's bothering you?" The question lingered between them. For several seconds, Ethan considered telling her everything. The pill, Maya, the conversation, the suspicion. Instead, he said nothing, because for the first time in 6 months, he wasn't sure who he could trust. Later that night, long after Claire had gone upstairs, Ethan sat alone in his study. Rain clouds drifted across the lake. Moonlight reflected on the water. The mansion remained silent. He opened the desk drawer. Inside rested the tiny plastic bag Maya had given him. The white pill looked harmless, ordinary, yet he couldn't stop staring at it. Finally, he picked up his phone, scrolled through old contacts, paused, then selected a name, Dr. Samuel Reed. The call connected after 2 rings. Ethan? The familiar voice sounded surprised. It's late. I know. Everything okay? Ethan looked down at the pill. No. Silence. Then Samuel spoke again. What happened? Ethan took a slow breath. I need a favor. The following afternoon, a black sedan pulled quietly into the rear entrance of the Whitmore estate. No company logo, no medical markings, nothing that would attract attention. Dr. Samuel Reed stepped out carrying a leather bag. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, one of the few physicians Ethan trusted completely. Years earlier, Samuel had treated Ethan's father. Their families went back decades. Unlike the specialists Claire preferred, Samuel had never cared about publicity, or appearances, or billing hours. He cared about facts, which was exactly what Ethan needed. They met in the study, alone, no assistants, no nurses, no Claire. Samuel immediately noticed the tension. You look worried. I am. Ethan reached into his pocket, removed the plastic bag, placed it on the desk. The doctor stared at the pill. What is this? I need you to tell me. Samuel looked up. Where did you get it? That's a longer story. The doctor picked up the bag, examined the tablet carefully, then frowned. Do you have more? No. Can I test it? That's why you're here. Samuel nodded slowly. For the next 30 minutes, he worked quietly, opening small testing kits, examining markings, taking notes. The room remained silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Ethan watched every movement, every expression, every reaction. Finally, Samuel sat back. His face had become very serious. The sight immediately made Ethan's stomach tighten. What is it? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed his glasses, folded them carefully, then looked directly at Ethan. Where exactly did this come from? The question sounded different now, heavier, more urgent. Ethan swallowed. Just tell me. Samuel exhaled slowly. This is not a medication intended to strengthen muscle recovery. The room suddenly felt smaller. Ethan's pulse quickened. What does it do? The doctor studied him carefully, then answered, It relaxes muscles. Ethan stared. That's bad? Not necessarily. Samuel paused. Unless someone takes it long term. The silence that followed seemed endless. What happens then? The doctor leaned forward. Extended use can contribute to muscle weakness. Ethan felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Samuel continued. Difficulty standing, difficulty balancing, reduced mobility. Every word landed harder than the last. The study seemed strangely quiet now. The lake outside, the wind, the house. Everything faded. Only Samuel's voice remained. If someone was already recovering from an injury, the doctor said carefully, this could significantly interfere with progress. Ethan looked at the white pill, then back at Samuel, then at the pill again. A cold feeling moved through his chest. Slowly, relentlessly. No. The word escaped automatically. Samuel remained silent. No. Ethan shook his head. There has to be some mistake. Maybe. Maybe. I haven't seen your full medical records. The doctor chose his words carefully. But I can tell you this. He tapped the plastic bag. This is not the medication I would prescribe for long-term recovery. The room fell silent again. Outside, dark clouds gathered over Lake Michigan. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the water. Ethan stared at the pill. Memories flooded his mind. Morning medications. Evening medications. Claire standing beside him. Claire handing him water. Claire reminding him not to miss a dose. Claire smiling, always smiling. Then another memory surfaced. Maya, a 9-year-old girl standing beside a church. What if I'm right? The question echoed through his mind. Suddenly, the room felt colder. Samuel watched him carefully. Ethan. He looked up. Who gave you that pill? For several seconds, he couldn't answer, because saying the name out loud would make the possibility real. Finally, he whispered it. Claire. The doctor's expression changed. Not shock. Concern. Deep concern. Ethan. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. You need answers. The thunder outside grew louder. Rain began tapping against the windows, and for the first time since the accident, the terrifying possibility became something more than suspicion. It became evidence. Not proof, not yet, but enough to change everything. Enough to make Ethan realize the wheelchair might not be his fate. It might be someone's plan. And somewhere across Chicago, Maya Carter was helping stack food boxes at St. Matthew's Church. She had no idea a secret doctor had just confirmed her worst fear. But she was about to learn something even more important. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives one small piece at a time, and the first piece had finally fallen into place. The storm rolled across Chicago throughout the night. Rain struck the tall windows of the Whitmore estate. Thunder echoed over Lake Michigan. But Ethan Whitmore barely noticed any of it. He sat alone in his study. The white pill rested on the desk beside Dr. Samuel Reed's report. For hours he stared at both, not because he doubted the findings, because he feared what came next. The truth had a strange weight. People imagined truth would feel liberating. Sometimes it did. Other times it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground beneath you wasn't solid after all. Near midnight, Ethan opened an old leather notebook. Inside were dates, appointments, recovery schedules, doctor visits, physical therapy sessions, medication adjustments, every detail from the past 6 months. For the first time, he reviewed everything through a different lens. Not as a patient, as an investigator. Patterns appeared immediately. His decline hadn't happened all at once. It had happened slowly, carefully, almost invisibly. One medication adjustment, one delayed therapy session, one recommendation to rest, one signed document, one missed meeting, one postponed decision, one surrendered responsibility at a time. A cage doesn't always have bars. Sometimes it has very comfortable pillows. Maya's words returned unexpectedly. The thought sent a chill through him. The next morning arrived bright and cold. Sunlight reflected across the lake. The mansion looked peaceful, beautiful, normal. Claire entered carrying breakfast. Her smile appeared flawless. Good morning. Ethan looked up from his newspaper. Morning. She handed him his pills. The familiar routine. The familiar gesture. The familiar lie. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel sadness. He felt anger. Not explosive anger. Something colder. Something quieter. The kind of anger that thinks. He accepted the pills, pretended to swallow, then drank water. Claire watched carefully. satisfied, exactly as she always did. After she left, Ethan walked, or rather rolled, into the bathroom. He leaned over the sink, spat the pills into a tissue, then stared at them. The simple act felt strangely powerful, the first decision he had made for himself in months. That afternoon, another visitor arrived through the rear entrance. Patricia Miles, his attorney, friend, trusted advisor for nearly 15 years. Unlike the corporate lawyers who filled boardrooms with polished language, Patricia preferred uncomfortable truths, and Ethan needed uncomfortable truths. They met in the study. She immediately noticed the tension. "You look terrible." Ethan laughed softly. "Nice to see you too." She sat across from him. "What's happening?" Without speaking, Ethan slid Samuel's report across the desk. Patricia read silently. The longer she read, the more serious her expression became. When she finished, she placed the document down very carefully. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." "I wish I could." Silence filled the room. Outside, gulls circled above the shoreline. The lake shimmered beneath autumn sunlight. Inside, everything felt darker. Patricia leaned forward. "What else?" Ethan told her everything. Maya, the pill, the warning, the standing exercise behind the church, Samuel's findings, every detail. When he finished, Patricia remained silent for a long moment. Then she asked a question Ethan hadn't considered. "What documents have you signed since the accident?" His stomach tightened immediately. A memory surfaced. Hospital forms, insurance papers, medical releases, temporary authority agreements, recovery authorizations, dozens, maybe hundreds. At the time, he barely read them. He was exhausted. Medicines made him groggy. Pain made concentration difficult. And Claire had always been there, helping, explaining, guiding, protecting. Or so he thought. Patricia opened her laptop. "Let's find out." For the next 3 hours, they reviewed records. The process felt endless. Pages, signatures, dates, legal language, authorization forms. Then Patricia stopped scrolling. Her face changed. Ethan immediately noticed. "What?" She turned the screen. A document appeared. His signature sat neatly at the bottom. The date was 4 months earlier, a month after the accident. "What is it?" Patricia frowned. "This grants temporary medical decision authority." Ethan stared. "So? So Claire can make healthcare decisions if you're deemed unable." He felt uneasy. "But that's normal, right?" "Maybe." Patricia continued reading, then stopped again. A second document, another signature, another date. Her expression darkened further. "What now?" "This grants temporary financial authority." The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan stared. Patricia clicked another file, then another, then another. The pattern emerged quickly. Medical authority, financial authority, corporate voting authority, board communication authority, temporary oversight powers, all connected, all signed during the same period, all justified as emergency precautions, all benefiting the same person. Claire. The silence stretched. Patricia finally spoke. "Ethan." He looked up. "Do you remember signing these?" His mouth opened, then closed, because the honest answer was no. Not clearly. Fragments, vague memories, hospital rooms, medication, pain, voices, clipboards, but not certainty. Never certainty. Patricia leaned back slowly. This isn't good. No. It gets worse. She opened another file. The screen filled with ownership records, business registrations, investment entities, complex corporate structures. What am I looking at? Patricia pointed toward several newly formed companies. These corporations started purchasing Whitmore Medical Tech shares. Ethan frowned. That happens all the time. Usually. She clicked again. A chart appeared. Then another. Then another. Lines connected companies, ownership structures, holding groups, financial trails, a web, complicated, deliberate, hidden. Patricia exhaled slowly. These companies appear unrelated. And? They aren't. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. She pointed toward a name buried deep inside multiple filings. Not directly, indirectly. Several layers removed, but visible. Claire Lawson. The room went completely silent. The clock ticked. The lake shimmered. A distant boat horn echoed across the water. Everything else disappeared. Ethan stared at the screen. No. Patricia didn't answer. No. This time his voice sounded weaker. Not denial, shock. Patricia nodded slowly. She's been acquiring influence. The words felt unreal. Why? Patricia looked directly at him. Because if doctors declare you permanently unable to manage the company... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Ethan understood. Temporary authority becomes permanent. Temporary control becomes ownership. Temporary decisions become permanent power. Everything suddenly connected. The medications, the weakness, the signed papers, the wedding, the timing, the carefully constructed image of the devoted fiancé. The story. It was all one story. A perfect story, a tragic billionaire, a loyal caregiver, a declining health condition, a transfer of responsibility, a marriage, no villains, no crimes, no questions, only sympathy. The brilliance of it made him sick. Patricia closed the laptop. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan whispered, I thought I was unlucky. Patricia's eyes softened. No. He looked toward the lake, toward the horizon, toward everything he nearly lost without realizing it. No, he repeated quietly. I was being managed. The realization hurt more than the injury itself, because injuries happen, accidents happen, life happens. But betrayal arrives carrying trust, and that made it infinitely more dangerous. Late that afternoon, Ethan asked Robert to drive him to St. Matthew's Church. Again. The community kitchen bustled with activity. Volunteers moved food crates. Children played near the parking lot. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the air. Life. Simple life. Nothing hidden. Nothing complicated. When Maya spotted him, she immediately ran over. You came back. Ethan smiled. Looks like I did. She studied his face carefully. You found something. The statement wasn't a question. He laughed softly. You really are observant. Maya shrugged. You look different. Ethan stared at the little girl, at her worn sneakers, her oversized coat, the flower still dusting one sleeve. A child. Just a child. And yet she had seen what an entire city had missed. He lowered his voice. You were right. Maya didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't look surprised. She simply nodded, as if truth didn't become more true because someone finally believed it. What happened? she asked. Ethan looked toward the church, then toward the people waiting for meals, then back at Maya. The wheelchair wasn't the plan. She frowned. What was? He exhaled slowly. Control. The little girl thought about that, then nodded once, like she understood far more than most adults, because maybe she did. And neither of them noticed the eviction notice sitting inside Maya's apartment across town, or the tears her mother would hide later that evening, or how little time remained before everything reached a breaking point. Because some storms arrive loudly, others arrive quietly, and the quiet ones are often the most dangerous of all. The first sign came in a plain white envelope. No dramatic phone call. No angry landlord pounding on a door. No shouting. Just a thin envelope slid beneath the door of apartment 3B, easy to miss. Easy to ignore. The kind of thing people walked past every day. But Denise Carter knew exactly what it was the moment she saw it. She stood frozen in the tiny kitchen. The evening light from the window cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Outside, a train thundered past the building. The walls rattled. The dishes trembled. Inside, Denise slowly opened the envelope. Maya was setting the table nearby. She pretended not to look, but she always looked. She always noticed. Her mother's face changed before she finished reading. The smile disappeared. The shoulders sank. The eyes became tired, older. Maya knew that look. It was the same look her mother wore whenever bills arrived. The same look she wore after long shifts at the church kitchen. The same look she wore when she thought nobody was watching. Denise folded the paper immediately. Too quickly. Mama? It's nothing. The answer came too fast, which meant it wasn't nothing. Maya continued placing forks beside paper plates. Was it bad? No. The lie sounded gentle, almost loving, which somehow made it sadder. That night they ate vegetable soup and bread left over from the church. The apartment smelled warm, despite the cold creeping through the old windows. A lamp flickered in the corner. Traffic drifted up from the street below. Everything looked normal. Everything felt fragile. After dinner, Maya found the envelope sitting partially hidden beneath a stack of church flyers. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. The large red letters were visible from across the room. Final notice. Her stomach tightened. She looked toward the bedroom where her mother was folding laundry. Suddenly, she understood. Not every detail, but enough. Later that night, after Denise had fallen asleep, Maya sat by the window watching trains pass. The city lights blurred in the glass. The world looked bigger from here. Bigger than their apartment. Bigger than their problems. Yet somehow their problems felt enormous. The church barely paid enough. Rent had increased again. Food costs had risen. And now, this. Maya pulled her knees to her chest. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about Ethan. She was thinking about home. The possibility of losing it. The possibility of seeing her mother's smile disappear completely. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Denise stood in the doorway. You should be sleeping. Maya turned. You too. Her mother smiled weakly, then sat beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. A freight train roared through the darkness. The apartment shook. The familiar sound somehow felt comforting. Finally, Maya asked quietly, Are we going to lose the apartment? Denise froze. The silence answered before words did. Maya lowered her eyes. Her mother exhaled slowly. We might. The honesty hurt, but not as much as another lie would have. Maya nodded. Okay. Denise looked surprised. Okay? The little girl shrugged. We still have each other. For several seconds, Denise couldn't speak, because children weren't supposed to comfort parents. Not like this. Yet Maya always seemed to find a way. Finally, Denise pulled her daughter close, and for a long moment, they sat together watching trains pass beneath the Chicago night. Neither of them knew how little time remained. Across the city, Ethan Whitmore sat in his study reviewing documents. Stacks of files covered the desk, corporate reports, legal agreements, financial records. Every page revealed another layer, another deception, another carefully hidden truth. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. Patricia had been right. Claire's plan wasn't emotional. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't the act of someone making desperate decisions. It was strategic. Months of preparation, months of positioning, months of waiting. The realization left Ethan exhausted. He leaned back in his chair. The lake beyond the windows glowed silver beneath moonlight. A memory surfaced. Maya standing behind the church. You stand first. Then you can help everyone. At the time, the words seemed simple. Now they felt important. Because despite everything he had learned, despite the evidence, despite the betrayal, he still couldn't walk. Not really. Not yet. The next afternoon, he returned to St. Matthew's Church. As usual, Maya was helping unload donations. As usual, she smiled when she saw him. But Ethan noticed something immediately. Something was different. The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. You okay? Maya nodded. Too quickly. Exactly the way her mother had. Ethan recognized the lie immediately, because he had spent 6 months surrounded by lies. You sure? Another shrug. I'm fine. No, you're not. Maya looked away. Toward the church. Toward the volunteers. Anywhere but at Ethan. For several moments, she remained silent. Then finally she whispered, We might lose our apartment. The words came out so quietly, Ethan almost missed them. His chest tightened. What? She forced a smile. A brave smile. The kind children wore when they didn't want adults worrying. It's okay, no. It wasn't okay. Ethan looked around. The church. The volunteers. The parking lot. This was the girl who had saved him. The girl who had asked for nothing. The girl who spent her free time feeding strangers, helping elderly people, carrying donations, giving away food she barely had herself. And now she was facing something terrifying. Alone. A familiar feeling rose inside him. The urge to help. Immediately. He reached for his wallet. Maya's eyes widened. No. Ethan paused. What? No. The answer was firm. Unexpectedly firm. You need help, so do you. The statement caught him off guard. Maya folded her arms. You still can't walk. I will. Then do that first. Ethan stared. The conversation felt strangely familiar. A few weeks earlier he had been the hopeless one. Now she was. Yet somehow she still focused on him. You don't understand. Maya shook her head. No. You don't understand. She pointed toward his legs. You stand first. The same words. Again. Simple. Certain. Powerful. You get better. Then you can help lots of people. Ethan looked away. Emotion tightened his throat unexpectedly. The little girl was worried about losing her home. And she was still thinking about helping others. Still thinking about him. The realization hurt. Because it reminded him of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Perspective. Money couldn't buy what Maya possessed: character, kindness, strength. The kind of strength that survived hardship, the kind that couldn't be measured on balance sheets. That afternoon, they practiced again behind the church. The old wooden bench waited beneath golden autumn sunlight. Leaves drifted through the air. The city buzzed beyond the parking lot. Life continued. Ethan placed both hands on the bench, pushed upward. His legs shook. But this time he stood longer. 5 seconds, then 10, then 15. Maya smiled. See? Ethan laughed. You're impossible. No. She grinned. I'm right. For the first time all week they both laughed. A small moment. A needed moment. A brief escape from everything threatening to overwhelm them. But neither noticed the black luxury SUV parked across the street, or the woman sitting inside watching them. Claire's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Her expression darkened. Because Ethan was changing, getting stronger, asking questions, thinking for himself again. And every day that happened, her carefully built future slipped a little farther away. She reached for her phone, dialed a number, waited. When someone answered, her voice dropped low. We may have a problem. The words disappeared into the afternoon wind. Across the street, Ethan managed to stand for nearly 20 seconds, the longest yet. And Maya clapped proudly. Neither knew the danger growing around them. Neither knew Claire was beginning to panic. And desperate people often made desperate decisions, especially when they were close to losing everything. The change was subtle at first, almost invisible. The kind of change most people would never notice. But Claire Lawson noticed everything. She noticed that Ethan asked more questions. She noticed that he seemed less tired. She noticed that he no longer accepted every explanation without thinking. Most of all, she noticed that something had returned to his eyes: determination. For 6 months, she had watched that determination slowly disappear. Now it was coming back, and that terrified her. 3 mornings later, Claire entered Ethan's bedroom carrying the usual tray: coffee, water, medication, the familiar routine, the familiar performance. Good morning. Ethan looked up from a business magazine. Morning. She studied him carefully. He looked healthier. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to make her nervous. You seem rested. I slept well. Claire handed him the pills. He accepted them. Smiled. Swallowed. At least, that's what she believed. In reality, Ethan had become very good at deception. The moment she looked away, the pills disappeared beneath his tongue, a skill he hated learning, but necessary. When Claire finally left the room, Ethan rolled into the bathroom, spat the pills into a tissue, then added them to a growing collection hidden inside a locked drawer. The pile had become impossible to ignore. White pills. Dozens of them. Evidence, proof. A quiet record of betrayal. That afternoon, Patricia returned to the estate. This time she brought additional information. The study felt unusually tense. Rain clouds gathered beyond the lake. Wind rattled tree branches outside. Patricia opened a folder. You were right. Ethan looked up. About what? Claire is accelerating things. His stomach tightened immediately. What does that mean? She handed him several printed emails. Board communications, meeting schedules, medical recommendations, internal memos. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. Then Ethan noticed the pattern. Every message suggested the same thing. His condition was deteriorating. His workload should be reduced. Additional authority should be transferred. Temporary measures should become long-term solutions. Slowly, carefully, legally. The cage was tightening. Patricia pointed toward one email. This came from a board advisor yesterday. Ethan read it. The words made his jaw tighten. Given Mr. Whitmore's continued decline, it may be appropriate to discuss permanent executive succession planning. Permanent. The word lingered. Heavy. Cold. Dangerous. Patricia folded her hands. The wedding is helping her. Ethan nodded. Of course it was. A devoted fiancé. A declining billionaire. A sympathetic story. Nobody questioned a woman caring for her disabled future husband. That was the brilliance of the plan. Everything looked compassionate. Everything looked reasonable. Everything looked legal. Until you examined it closely. Then it looked like theft. The realization filled Ethan with quiet fury, not explosive anger, something sharper, more focused, the kind that fuels action. Patricia studied him carefully. How's the walking? A small smile appeared. Better. How much better? He hesitated, then answered honestly. I stood for almost a minute yesterday. Patricia's eyes widened. Ethan. It surprised me too. The lawyer smiled for the first time all afternoon. Good. For a moment, hope entered the room. A rare visitor. Then Patricia's expression darkened again. There's something else. The hope immediately faded. What? She slid another document across the desk. A wedding timeline. Guest list. Seating chart. Investor list. Board members. Media contacts. Nearly everyone important to Whitmore Medical Tech would attend. The realization struck him instantly. The wedding wasn't merely a ceremony. It was a stage, a public stage, a perfect stage. And suddenly an idea began forming. Not fully, not yet. Just the outline, the shape of something, the possibility of turning Claire's plan against her. Hours later, Ethan arrived at St. Matthew's Church. The afternoon sky glowed orange behind the city skyline. Children played basketball in a nearby parking lot. The smell of soup drifted from the kitchen. Life moved at its usual pace. Simple, honest. Maya was helping unload donations when she spotted him. Immediately she smiled, then noticed something. You look angry. Ethan laughed. Do I? Yes. The answer came instantly. He shook his head. Maybe a little. Maya walked beside his wheelchair. What happened? For a moment he considered giving a complicated explanation. Corporate control, financial authority, legal structures. Then he remembered who he was talking to. A person is trying to take something that belongs to me. Maya thought about that, then nodded. That's bad. Very. They reached the familiar area behind the church. The wooden bench waited beneath a canopy of autumn leaves. Golden sunlight filtered through branches overhead. The place had become their training ground, their secret. Maya immediately pointed toward the bench. Today we stand longer. Ethan laughed. No hello? We already said hello. Fair point. He moved into position, hands on the bench, breathing slowly. Then pushed upward. His legs trembled. But he stood. 10 seconds. 20. 30. 40. The shaking remained. Yet beneath the shaking, something else existed now. Strength. Returning. Slowly. Painfully. But undeniably. Maya grinned. You see? Ethan nodded. I see. For several moments he remained standing, watching sunlight dance across the pavement, feeling wind against his face, experiencing the world from eye level again. The sensation felt strangely emotional. He hadn't realized how much he missed it. Finally, he sat down, breathing hard, exhausted, but smiling. Then Maya asked a question, a simple question. The kind children ask, the kind adults avoid. Are you scared? The smile faded. Ethan looked away, toward the city, toward the church, toward everything. Finally, he answered, yes. Maya nodded, not surprised. Why? The question lingered. For several moments, Ethan searched for the right answer, then found it. Because I almost lost myself. The words sounded strange, but true. I thought I was losing my legs. Maya listened quietly. But I was losing something bigger. What? My choices. The little girl remained silent. Ethan continued. Every day someone decided things for me. He looked down at his hands. What medicine I take. What papers I sign. What meetings I attend. What I believe about my own body. The realization felt heavier now that he spoke it aloud. For 6 months, he hadn't merely been recovering. He had been surrendering, piece by piece, without noticing. Maya sat beside him on the bench, then said something very softly. My grandpa used to say something. Ethan looked at her. What? She thought carefully, then repeated it exactly. When people stop making their own decisions, someone else starts making them. The simplicity struck him, because it was true, painfully true. He smiled. Your grandpa sounds wise. He was. The sadness in her voice appeared briefly, then disappeared, like most things children learned to hide. The sun slowly sank lower. Long shadows stretched across the churchyard. The city lights began waking one by one. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Ethan stood again, without being asked, without being told. Maya smiled immediately. What are you doing? He looked down at his legs, then toward the horizon, then back at Maya, taking something back. The answer sounded simple, but both understood what he meant. Across town, Claire sat alone in her luxury SUV parked outside a downtown office building. Her phone rested against her ear. The conversation wasn't going well. No. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. I don't care what the board thinks. Silence. Then, because he's changing. More silence. The person on the other end spoke. Claire's face tightened. I know what the doctors say. Her voice dropped lower. But he's asking questions. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Finally, she whispered, after the wedding, none of this will matter. She ended the call, sat motionless, watching evening traffic move past. The city reflected across the windshield. Everything she had worked for sat within reach. The company, the authority, the future, all of it. And now one little girl from Southside Chicago threatened everything. Claire's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, because for the first time in months, she wasn't controlling the story anymore, and that frightened her more than anything. Meanwhile, behind St. Matthew's Church, Ethan Whitmore stood again. Longer this time. Stronger. Not healed. Not recovered. Not yet. But changing. And somewhere deep inside, a new thought had begun to grow. Maybe he wouldn't expose Claire before the wedding. Maybe he would wait. Maybe the wedding itself was exactly where the truth belonged. Because sometimes the best place to destroy a lie is the stage where it planned to become permanent. The idea stayed with Ethan for days. The wedding. Not as a celebration, not as a promise, not as the beginning of a future, as a battlefield. A place where truth and deception would finally meet. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, it gave him purpose. For the first time since the accident, he wasn't simply reacting to life. He was preparing for something, planning, fighting, living. Outside, Chicago drifted deeper into autumn. Leaves covered sidewalks. Cold winds swept through downtown streets. The mornings arrived darker. The evenings arrived faster. And every day, Ethan grew slightly stronger. Not enough for anyone to notice, except Maya and Claire. One saw hope. The other saw danger. 3 days after Patricia's latest visit, a steady rain settled over the city. Not heavy, just persistent, the kind that soaked jackets and painted everything silver. Most people avoided being outside. Maya didn't. Neither did Ethan. Behind St. Matthew's Church, the pavement glistened beneath gray skies. Rain tapped against metal dumpsters. Water dripped from tree branches. The old wooden bench looked darker from the moisture. Maya stood beneath her oversized coat, waiting. When Ethan arrived, she smiled. "You came. You sound surprised." "I'm not." She grinned. "I just like saying it." Ethan laughed. The sound felt easier these days. Lighter. Something he hadn't felt in months. Maya pointed toward the wet pavement. "Today we walk." The statement hung in the air. Ethan blinked. "Walk?" She nodded. "Real walking." He looked down at his legs, then toward the wheelchair, then back at her. Fear immediately appeared. Not fear of falling, fear of hope. Hope remained the most dangerous thing in the world, because hope invited disappointment. Still, he had come too far to stop now. "Okay." Maya smiled. "Good." Robert stood nearby beneath an umbrella, watching, waiting, ready to help if necessary. But he stayed silent. Because he understood something now. This wasn't physical therapy. Not exactly. It was something deeper. The return of belief. Ethan moved toward the bench, placed both hands on the weathered wood. Rain landed softly on his shoulders. The city hummed in the distance. His heart pounded. Then he pushed upward. Standing came easier now. Not easy. Never easy. But possible. His legs trembled. His balance wavered. Yet he remained upright. Maya smiled. "See?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "I see." For several moments he simply stood there, feeling rain on his face, feeling weight in his legs, feeling alive. Then Maya pointed ahead, a few feet away. Nothing dramatic. Just open pavement. One step. The words sounded simple, but Ethan knew better. One step wasn't one step. One step was freedom. One step was proof. One step was the difference between who he had become and who he used to be. His right foot moved first. Barely. An inch. Then another. His body shook violently. Instinct screamed at him to sit, to stop, to stay safe. Instead, he kept going. The foot landed. Solid. Real. His eyes widened. Maya smiled. "That's one." Ethan stared at the ground. He had done it. Actually done it. Not stood. Walked. One step. A small step. But still, a step. Emotion tightened his throat. Before he could speak, Maya pointed again. Another. He laughed breathlessly. "You don't celebrate much, do you?" "We celebrate later." The answer sounded perfectly reasonable to her. Ethan shook his head, then took another step. This one felt harder. His legs trembled, his balance shifted. For a terrifying moment he thought he might fall. Maya moved closer, not touching him, just there, present, a reminder that he wasn't alone. The second step landed, then the third. By the fourth, sweat mixed with rain on his forehead. By the fifth, his muscles burned. By the sixth, breathing became difficult. Yet he continued, because every step carried something back. Confidence, control, dignity, life. When he finally stopped, he stood nearly 10 feet from the wheelchair. The distance wasn't impressive, not to healthy people, not to marathon runners, not to athletes, but to Ethan Whitmore. It felt like crossing an ocean. He turned slowly, looked back at the wheelchair. Rain collected on its empty seat. For the first time, it didn't look like part of him. It looked separate, like an object, a thing, not an identity, not a future, just a chair. Tears appeared unexpectedly. He blinked them away. Maya pretended not to notice. Again, the kindness of looking away. After a long moment, Ethan whispered, "I walked." Maya nodded. "Yes." Her smile widened. "You walked." The words sounded different when someone else said them. More real, more permanent, more powerful. For several moments, neither spoke. Rain continued falling. The city continued moving. And somewhere inside Ethan, something long asleep began waking up. Later that afternoon, after training ended, Ethan sat inside the church kitchen drinking coffee. Volunteers moved around them. The smell of soup filled the room. Harold organized donation boxes nearby. Life continued normally, yet Ethan couldn't stop smiling. Maya noticed immediately. "You keep looking happy." He laughed. "I am happy." "Good." The answer came so simply. Like happiness required no further explanation. Perhaps it didn't. Then Ethan noticed something. A familiar shadow behind Maya's smile. The same one he'd seen days earlier. The apartment. The eviction notice. The fear she pretended not to carry. "How's your mom?" Maya hesitated, then shrugged. "Okay. Not okay. Definitely not okay." Ethan recognized the lie instantly. Before he could ask more, Denise entered carrying food trays. She looked exhausted, far more exhausted than usual. Dark circles beneath her eyes, tension in her shoulders. The kind people carried when trying to protect others from bad news. She smiled when she saw Ethan. "Good afternoon." "Afternoon." The conversation remained polite. Normal. Yet Ethan noticed how carefully Denise avoided discussing anything personal. How quickly she changed subjects. How often she forced smiles. The same way he used to. Before Maya arrived. Before truth arrived. Before hope arrived. As evening approached, Ethan returned home. The mansion felt colder than usual. Larger. Emptier. Claire waited in the dining room. A stack of wedding catalogs spread across the table. Her smile appeared immediately. "There you are." Ethan nodded. Traffic lights reflected through the windows behind her. The lake had disappeared into darkness. "Busy day?" Claire asked. "Something like that." She studied him carefully. Too carefully. Searching. Measuring. Calculating. The realization made him uneasy. For months he had mistaken attention for affection. Now he wasn't sure. Claire poured wine. "I spoke with the board today." The statement immediately caught his attention. "Oh." "They're concerned about your health." Of course they were, because someone kept encouraging them to be. They suggested reducing your responsibilities. Ethan remained calm. "Did they?" Claire nodded. They just want what's best for you. The words sounded familiar. Everything she said sounded familiar now, like lines from a script, a carefully rehearsed performance. He smiled politely. That's thoughtful. Something flickered across her face. Disappointment, perhaps. She wanted agreement, compliance, submission. Instead, she received neutrality, and neutrality made nervous people uncomfortable. That night, long after Claire had gone upstairs, Ethan stood alone in his bedroom. No bench, no church, no Maya. Just silence. Moonlight spilled across the carpet. The city glowed beyond the windows. His legs trembled. His muscles ached. His body begged him to stop. Instead, he took one step, then another, then another. 5, 6, 7. The distance wasn't far, but it was real. When he finally sat on the edge of the bed, breathing hard, he looked toward the mirror. The man staring back looked tired, older, thinner, but different. The hopelessness was gone. Not completely, not forever. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to fight. Across town, Maya sat beside her mother in their apartment. The eviction notice remained hidden inside a drawer. Neither mentioned it. Neither needed to. The silence carried its own weight. Outside, rain continued tapping against the windows. A train passed. The building shook. And Maya thought about Ethan, about the steps, about the smile she saw afterward. Because helping people always made her happy, even when her own life felt uncertain, especially then. She didn't know it yet. But those 10 steps in the rain had changed more than Ethan's recovery. They had changed his future. Because every lie Claire built depended on one thing: a man who could never stand. And now, that man was learning how to walk. The final week before the wedding passed like a countdown clock nobody could stop. Every day carried 2 completely different stories. One story lived in public. The other lived in secret. Publicly, Ethan Whitmore was the tragic billionaire preparing to marry the devoted woman who had stood beside him through his darkest days. That was the story newspapers loved. That was the story investors believed. That was the story Claire carefully fed to everyone around her. Privately, a very different story was unfolding. One measured in steps. One measured in evidence. One measured in truth. 7 days before the ceremony, Ethan walked 12 steps behind St. Matthew's Church. 5 days before the ceremony, he walked 20. 3 days before the ceremony, he crossed the entire paved area without touching the bench. Every step felt like reclaiming stolen ground. Every step felt like taking something back. Meanwhile, Patricia continued gathering evidence: the video footage, the medical reports, the financial records, the authorization documents. Every piece of the puzzle now existed. Claire's plan no longer looked like concern. It looked like control. The only question remaining was timing, and Ethan had already made his decision. The wedding. It would happen at the wedding. 3 days before the ceremony, Ethan sat with Patricia in his study. The lake beyond the windows reflected a gray autumn sky. The air smelled faintly of rain. Stacks of folders covered the desk. Patricia looked exhausted, but satisfied. "We have enough." Ethan nodded. "I know. The video from the estate cameras is clear." She slid a flash drive across the desk. The footage shows her switching medication containers. Ethan stared at the drive. Months of his life hidden inside something smaller than a thumb. Patricia continued. "The doctor's statement is ready." Another folder. The corporate investigators traced the shell companies. Another folder. The board will see everything. Another folder. Silence settled across the room. Finally, Patricia leaned back. Are you sure you want to do this publicly? Ethan turned toward the lake. For a moment, he watched waves rolling against the shoreline. Then he thought about Maya, the church, the apartment, the eviction notice, the little girl who had helped him when she had every reason to focus on herself. And he remembered something. Bad people depended on silence. Truth needed witnesses. Yes. Patricia nodded slowly, then smiled. Good. The next afternoon, Ethan visited St. Matthew's Church one final time before the wedding. The kitchen buzzed with activity. Volunteers moved supplies. Children carried bread baskets. The familiar smell of soup drifted through the building. For months, this place had become his sanctuary. The one place where nobody cared about stock prices, or reputation, or power. The one place where people helped because helping mattered. Maya spotted him immediately. She ran over. You look nervous. Ethan laughed. Do I? Very. He couldn't argue. Tomorrow would change everything. Maya tilted her head. Are you scared? The question again. Always the same question. Always the right question. This time his answer came easier. A little. She nodded. That's okay. Is it? Yes. She smiled. Brave people get scared too. The statement made Ethan laugh. Then something unexpected happened. He looked at Maya and realized how much she had changed his life. Not intentionally. Not because she wanted something. Simply because she cared. The realization hit him harder than any legal document. Harder than any medical report. For months, doctors had treated symptoms. Maya had treated hopelessness. And hopelessness had been the real disease. Ethan lowered his voice. Thank you. Maya blinked. For what? For not giving up on me. The little girl looked genuinely confused. Why would I do that? The answer came so naturally, so innocently, that Ethan felt his throat tighten. Why would I do that? Because that's who she was. Someone who saw value in people even when the rest of the world stopped looking. Someone who helped because it was right, not because it was profitable, not because it was convenient, because it was right. The following morning arrived beneath pale Chicago sunlight. Wedding day. The Whitmore estate transformed overnight. White tents stretched across the lawn. Fresh flowers lined walkways. Luxury cars arrived one after another. Photographers adjusted cameras. Event staff moved quickly through the grounds. Everything looked perfect. Exactly as Claire wanted. By noon, guests filled the estate. Investors, executives, board members, friends, reporters, doctors, lawyers, everyone important, everyone who mattered, everyone who believed the story. Inside the mansion, Ethan sat alone in a private room. His tailored suit hung perfectly. The wheelchair waited nearby. A symbol, a disguise, a weapon. Patricia entered quietly. Everything is ready, Ethan nodded. Good. She studied him carefully. You can still stop this. He smiled. No. A pause. Then, I've spent 6 months watching someone write my story. He looked toward the wheelchair. Today, I write my own. Patricia smiled, then left. Minutes later, Claire entered. She looked stunning, elegant, confident, radiant. The image of the perfect bride. The image of victory. At least she thought so. Her smile appeared immediately. "You look handsome." Ethan smiled back. "You look happy." "I am." The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Claire moved beside him, gently touching his shoulder. The gesture looked loving. Maybe once he would have believed it. Now he only saw performance. The role she played. The role everyone believed. "We made it." She smiled. "After everything." Ethan looked into her eyes, and for a brief moment he wondered whether any part of it had ever been real. Then the moment passed. Outside, music began. The ceremony was starting. Guests settled into rows of white chairs overlooking Lake Michigan. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the water. The scene looked cinematic, beautiful, perfect. The kind of wedding magazines loved. The kind people remembered. Claire walked toward the ceremony area first. Guests smiled. Photographers snapped pictures. Whispers followed her. Such devotion. Such loyalty. Such love. The story was working exactly as planned. Then Ethan appeared, seated in the wheelchair, pushed forward by Robert. A murmur swept through the crowd. Sympathy, compassion, admiration. Exactly what Claire expected. The officiant stood beneath a floral arch. Board members occupied the front rows. Reporters sat near the aisle. Everything was ready. The perfect ending to her perfect plan. The wheelchair stopped near the stage. A ramp had been installed beside the stairs, because everyone expected Ethan to remain seated, forever. The officiant smiled warmly. "We are gathered here today." "Wait," the single word cut through the ceremony. The crowd fell silent. The officiant blinked. Claire's smile faltered slightly. Ethan looked out across the audience. Hundreds of eyes stared back. Expectant, confused, curious. He took a slow breath, then placed both hands on the arms of the wheelchair. The silence deepened. A gull cried somewhere above the lake. Wind moved gently through the flowers. Time itself seemed to slow. Ethan pushed downward. Claire's smile disappeared. The crowd leaned forward. The wheelchair shifted. Then, slowly, carefully, Ethan stood. Gasps exploded through the audience. Several people rose from their seats. Others simply stared. Disbelief spread across every face. Claire looked frozen. Color drained from her cheeks. The world seemed to stop. Ethan remained standing. His legs trembled, but they held. For months, everyone had seen a broken man. Now they saw something else. Truth. He took one step, then another, toward the stage, toward the microphone, toward the end of the lie. The crowd remained completely silent, because deep down everyone understood something important. This was no longer a wedding. Something else was happening, something far bigger. And Claire suddenly realized her carefully written story was beginning to collapse, right in front of everyone, with nowhere left to hide. The silence over the Whitmore estate felt unreal. Hundreds of guests sat frozen in their seats. The lake shimmered behind the ceremony platform. White flowers swayed gently in the breeze. A photographer lowered his camera. A waiter stopped moving. Even the officiant seemed unable to speak. Because Ethan Whitmore was standing, not sitting, not being pushed, not broken. Standing. Claire stared at him as if she were looking at a ghost. Her face had lost all color. For 6 months she had built an entire future around one assumption, that Ethan would never stand again. And now that future was collapsing in front of her eyes. Ethan took another slow step toward the microphone. Then another. His legs still trembled. His body still carried the memory of weakness, but he remained upright, and that changed everything. He stopped at the center of the stage, looked out across the crowd, then spoke. For 6 months, his voice carried across the quiet lawn. For 6 months, I believed I was losing my ability to walk. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The audience listened, because everyone could feel the weight behind those words. Ethan continued. I trusted doctors. I trusted reports. I trusted medication. Then he turned and looked directly at Claire. Most of the guests followed his gaze. The bride stood motionless, her perfect smile gone, her perfect story unraveling. I also trusted the person standing beside me. A murmur moved through the crowd, tiny, uneasy, confused. Claire's eyes widened. The first signs of panic appeared. Ethan looked toward the front row. Patricia stood, gave a small nod. Immediately, the large display screen behind the stage came to life. The image appeared. Security footage. Clear, sharp, undeniable. Gasps spread through the audience. The footage showed Claire in the kitchen, opening containers, moving medication, carefully transferring pills from one bottle to another. No explanation, no context. Just the image. Raw, uncomfortable, real. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Board members exchanged nervous glances. Investors leaned forward. Reporters raised cameras. The screen changed. Medical reports appeared. Dr. Samuel Reed's findings, descriptions of muscle weakness, documentation of the medication, independent analysis, professional conclusions, evidence. The screen changed again. Financial records, corporate documents, shell companies, ownership structures, hidden purchases, layers of transactions leading back to Claire. More whispers, more confusion, more disbelief. The beautiful wedding no longer looked beautiful. It looked like a courtroom. Ethan waited, allowed the evidence to speak, allowed the truth room to breathe. Then he faced the audience again. I wasn't trapped in a wheelchair because I was destined to be there. His voice remained calm, steady. I was trapped because someone wanted me there. The words landed heavily, like stones dropped into still water. Shock moved through the crowd. Claire finally found her voice. Ethan. He raised a hand, not angrily, simply firmly. The gesture stopped her. For months, she had controlled every conversation. Not today. Today belonged to the truth. You didn't just try to take my company. Ethan's eyes never left hers. You didn't just try to take my money. The entire estate seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sentence nobody would forget. You tried to take my life. Silence. Absolute silence. Claire looked around desperately, searching for allies, for sympathy, for anything. But the faces staring back at her had changed. The story she spent months creating was gone. People no longer saw a loving fiancé. They saw questions, doubt, suspicion. The board members looked horrified. The investors looked furious. The reporters looked energized. Everything she had worked toward was slipping away, and she knew it. A moment later, security personnel quietly approached. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just professional, the way endings often arrive. Claire's eyes filled with disbelief, then fear, then defeat. Because for the first time in months, she was no longer controlling the narrative. She opened her mouth, perhaps to explain, perhaps to defend herself. perhaps to beg. But no words came. The truth had become too large, too visible, too public. She slowly lowered her head, and the story she built collapsed completely. For several long moments, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. The applause started. One person, then another, until the entire audience stood. Board members, employees, guests, friends, strangers. They weren't applauding the scandal. They weren't applauding revenge. They were applauding survival. A man who refused to disappear. A man who stood up, literally and figuratively. Ethan remained still, taking in the moment, the applause, the relief, the strange feeling of freedom. Then a reporter shouted a question. "Mr. Whitmore!" The applause softened. Everyone turned. The reporter raised his voice. "Who helped you recover?" The question hung in the air, a simple question. But Ethan already knew the answer. He looked beyond the crowd, beyond the expensive suits, beyond the cameras, toward the back of the garden. A small figure stood near the edge of the ceremony, wearing an old coat, trying not to be noticed. Maya. Exactly where she felt most comfortable, away from attention, away from spotlights, away from praise. Ethan smiled, then pointed. Every head turned. Maya froze, completely surprised. The crowd followed his gaze. Many had never noticed her before, a little black girl standing quietly near the fence, someone easy to overlook, someone society overlooked every day. Ethan's voice softened. She did. Maya's eyes widened. The audience looked confused, then curious, then emotional as realization spread. Ethan continued. "When everyone else told me what I couldn't do," he smiled toward Maya. "She reminded me what I still could." The little girl lowered her eyes, embarrassed, shy, uncomfortable with attention. Exactly the same way truly kind people often are. The applause returned, louder this time, much louder. And for the first time in her life, Maya Carter found herself standing in the center of a story she never tried to join. Weeks later, life looked very different. Winter arrived in Chicago. Snow covered sidewalks. Christmas lights glowed through neighborhood windows. The city seemed softer beneath fresh snow. One afternoon, Maya stood outside a small brick house on a quiet street. A real house, not an apartment, not temporary. Home. Denise stared at the front door in disbelief. Tears filled her eyes. "Maya." The little girl looked up. "What?" Denise laughed through tears. "We have a home." The words felt impossible, yet they were real. Ethan had quietly purchased the property through a housing foundation. No publicity, no cameras, no headlines. Just help. The kind of help Maya had given him first. Months later, another surprise arrived. A scholarship fund, full educational support, private tutoring, future college assistance. Every opportunity Maya could ever need. Again, no publicity, no speeches, just gratitude. Because Ethan understood something now. Real kindness isn't a transaction, it's a gift, and gifts should be passed forward. The biggest change happened the following spring. A new foundation opened in Chicago. Whitmore Hope Initiative. Its mission was simple: helping children and families facing hardship, food programs, housing assistance, educational support, community resources. At the entrance stood a bronze plaque. Simple, elegant, and carrying a message Ethan insisted on writing himself. It read, "She helped me walk again before I ever helped her." On opening day, reporters asked Ethan why. Why dedicate an entire foundation to one little girl? Why build all of this? Why keep talking about Maya Carter? Ethan smiled, then answered honestly. Because people looked at her and saw a poor child. He paused. But when I looked at her, his eyes found Maya standing nearby. Older now, stronger, still carrying the same kind heart. I saw the person who saved my life. The crowd fell quiet, because everyone understood. The miracle had never been walking. Walking was only the visible part. The real miracle was kindness. A little girl who had every reason to focus on her own struggles, yet chose to help someone else. A little girl the world ignored. A little girl who changed everything. And years later, whenever people asked Ethan Whitmore about the greatest investment he ever made, they expected him to mention a company, a stock, a business deal. Instead, he always smiled and gave the same answer. A 9-year-old girl named Maya Carter. Because sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive in a limousine. Sometimes they don't wear expensive clothes. Sometimes they don't have power or money or influence. Sometimes they arrive with flour on their hands from helping in a church kitchen. Sometimes they live near train tracks. Sometimes they're the person everyone overlooks. And sometimes they're exactly the person God sends when your life needs saving. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share where you're watching from. Because kindness has a way of traveling farther than any of us ever expect. When Ethan Whitmore stood at that wedding and pointed to Maya Carter standing quietly at the back of the crowd, he reminded everyone that the person who changes your life is often the one nobody notices. The little girl who arrived with flour on her hands ended up helping a billionaire stand on his own feet again. This story isn't really about money, power, or even recovery. It's about the invisible people who step into our lives, ask for nothing in return, and end up changing everything without ever realizing it. Today, think about one person you've overlooked lately. Maybe someone like Maya, someone whose kindness, encouragement, or simple presence has helped you more than you ever acknowledged. If that person comes to mind, don't wait. Reach out and tell them. If Maya's story touched your heart, comment one below and tell me, has there ever been someone in your life who helped you through a difficult season without asking for anything in return? I'd love to hear your story, and stay with us, because the next story might make you look at an ordinary stranger in a completely different way.